Well arrived everyone, today is Tuesday and we are just about to finish our 4th week of Season 2. So what perfect timing to have our recap of the 4th week of Mythic Plus. This has been quite the good week for everyone who wanted to push, apparently. As it turns out, it has been quite easy to go a bit higher in keys in this fortified, afflicted and raging week. However, let's just start first with how things have been going for the specs before we go any deeper in the dungeons. So this week we continue on what we followed up last week with the protection paladin, somewhat stopping right before the 50% of all tanks. It was at 48% 2 weeks ago, it was at 45% last week, and this week it went down to 43%. The tank who is visibly gaining more over time for now is Vengeance Demon Hunter. This one seems to be the new almost flavor of the month on the rise recently, partly or mostly having to do with the big damage that Vengeance Demon Hunter has been discovered to be doing in Season 2. It's growing quite a bit in popularity. Still, as you can see, far away from the popularity of a protection paladin, but definitely in a much better state, for example, than they were in Season 1. Also worth noting that tomorrow or today in NA we are getting the hotfix which will buff Protection Warrior in both damage and defensiveness, and will also buff the damage of Blood Death Knight. And technically true, Master Monk was also buffed, but that was more like a compensation buff to the nerf they received before, so it's not nearly as big of a change. So we will see if anything will change with tanks based on these buffs coming in this new reset. Now, where the situation really doesn't change in terms of popularity is in healers. Now, talking about the hotfixes, not really anything too much will change for healers, because it's just going to be a 3% more healing for Mystical Monk and a 15% more damage to Disintegrate for Preservation Evoker. So this is unlikely to be bringing any major shifts in the meta when it comes to healers. The situation is mostly remaining the same as we have checked since last week. The situation also remains somewhat dominant for Red Paladin in keys at or above 20, with Red Paladin continuing to make up for 1/4 of every melee DPS pick. 25% of all melee players are trying out Red right now. The other popular specs are still remaining the same: Fury, Subtlety and Havoc, first in line, and then lower down you have Enhancement and Windwalker. This seems to be the layering of melee DPS specs, which hasn't changed that much from last week. Talking about the hotfix coming and talking about the specs getting buffed, you do have Arms Warrior getting buffed by quite a bit this reset. You also have Assassination Rogue getting buffed by quite a bit this reset. Now, if we consider Assassination is so low, it doesn't even show up as a percentage right now in Mythic Plus in high keys, and that Arms Warrior is also quite low right now, it's unlikely those buffs are going to be, changing something for the melee DPS in Mythic Plus. But hey, maybe Arms, there is a slight hint of hope for Arms to be doing better, but it's unlikely right now. The one thing that might change with the buffs coming soon is the range DPS situation, because once again Shadow Priest is the most popular, followed up by a very good average, to be honest. Besides Elemental Shaman, as you can see here, you have Marksmanship, you have Beast Mastery, you have Frost Mage, you have Destro and Demo for Warlock, and then you have Balance and Devastation, all quite even, all averaging the 9 to 10% in popularity. So it's quite a healthy situation for the majority of the ranged DPS, with the unlucky exception of Elemental. So what is this hotfix coming soon bringing? Well, it's bringing a buff to Beast Mastery, and Beast Mastery was already somewhat tied with Marksmanship, so it's gonna be likely bound to surpass Marksmanship now with the changes. Also, it's going to be bringing a pretty hefty buff to Fire Mage, which is currently still, lower down and much lower than Frost Mage. So for range DPS, we might be seeing some interesting changes coming with this reset based on the specs getting buffed very, very soon. Now, even though we just looked at the overall popularity, as we know, sometimes the meta is decided by a trickle-down effect from what the top players are doing, from what you see, for example, on streams, on videos, or in the top results, in the top Mythic Plus rating players, for example. And I thought it was interesting to look at this, which is, the top keys being completed at the moment in Mythic Plus. And as you can see, we do get quite the weird results compared to what we just saw from the general population. For example, for tanks, all of a sudden, Guardian Druid is the third highest tank in the very high keys. Also, Vengeance Demon Hunter is very, very represented in the very top level of keys. The healers are even more messed up because the dominance of Resto Shaman is nowhere to be seen. Instead, here we have a pretty even split between Preservation Evoker, Resto Druid, Holy Paladin, Discipline Priest, and Resto Shaman. Same can be said for the melee DPS. We just said that the top of the melee picks were supposed to be Subtlety, Havoc, and Ret. Yet, in the top keys, there is just a couple of Ret players. You do have more enhancement players, for example, compared to what we would see from the general population. We also see a lot of Balance Druids. We do still see, of course, Shadow Priests, and we see Rogues, of course. But the situation is much more diverse, surprisingly, at the very high level of keys. Now, going back to look at the peasants, the general population, rather than looking at the top players, these are the most popular compositions that you will find in Mythic Plus. So how likely you are to find a comp like this in your group, assuming you are one of these specs. Once again, the tank line is completely pink because it's Prot Paladin, and the healer line is mostly dominated by Resto Shaman. Where we do find some differences is in the DPS. Now, absolute dominance for Shadow Priest. Shadow Priest is present in every single of the 12 most popular comps in Mythic Plus right now. We do have, surprisingly, one Elemental Shaman in one of the more popular comps, one enhancement and one destruction warlock. The rest is basically split. It's split between Ret Paladin, Shadow Priest, Balance Druid, and Subtlety Rogue. Those are the most popular comps you will find in Mythic Plus. Now, yes, things get a little bit more diverse if you go from the top 12 to the next 13th to 24th most popular compositions. We start seeing, for example, Vengeance Demon Hunters popping up instead of just nothing but Prot Paladin. We start seeing Preservation Evoker, Restoration Druid. We do see more mages in here as well, so it changes just a little bit in the lower down most popular compositions when it comes to Mythic Plus. What can mean a little bit more is when you look at the week itself. As I mentioned, we are just finishing a fortified, afflicted, raging week, which looked to be, at the very least, at first glance, a pretty good week. Just by looking at the new highest keys being completed by the top groups, it looked like it was quite easy to start getting new records of high keys in this week. And the answer is yes. Indeed, today, this week, this last reset has been the easiest week of the season in terms of chance to complete your key. You can even see it in here in our dungeons by difficulty, where we do see a pretty high overall chance from the 94% of Underrot all the way down to the 73% of Freehold. So being the lowest dungeon as a chance to complete it at a 73% chance is still quite high overall. So that is pretty good for this week. What you can also see is our all-time top 10 of Dragonflight, if we also include the dungeons from Season 1. No, once again, Shadowmoon Burial Grounds is unbeatable. Shadowmoon Burial Grounds is still our first and easiest dungeon so far in this expansion. However, the top has been now dominated by the Season 2 dungeons. In particular, no surprise, the Underrot and Freehold have now taken hold of the podium for the easiest dungeons in Dragonflight. So right now in the top 10 of easiest dungeons, we have 6 dungeons from Season 2 and 4 dungeons from Season 1. So it looks like at first glance Season 2 might be a bit easier than Season 1 when it comes to the difficulty of dungeons. So now that we have our recap for the 4th week of Mythic Plus and basically for the first month of the season, it's gonna be interesting to see, as mentioned, once the hotfix comes through today, in NA and tomorrow in EU. What is going to change in terms of the specs being given more attention? So Prot Warrior, Blood DK, Fire Mage, Arms Warrior, Assassination Rogue, etc, just to see how many things are going to be changing based on those buffs that the specs are going to be receiving. So this is what we are currently sitting on. Now, as far as the news for today when it comes to Mythic Plus, we are now done. I'm going to leave you to the rest of the beginning of your new week from NA, or at the last day of the week from EU, waiting for the reset on Wednesday. So we are going to be leaving each other, of course, by thanking all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel. You can still support as usual in plenty of other ways, like liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. And of course, still you can follow me over on my Twitter, as well as following me over on my stream on Twitch. So with these useless things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, honestly, there might be a copium angle for the incoming buffs for Arms Warrior and for Fire Mage. Yes, I know, it's good quality copium.